Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So March is almost over, which means it's time to set up my journal for April. And I have to say this one turned out super cute, so I really hope you guys enjoy the video, and let's start with a little flip through of my spreads from March. I'm using my bullet journal from Arch and Olive as always, and you can use my affiliate code ARTandBujos for 10% off, which also helps to support me and my channel. Now, the theme for March was definitely a bit out of my comfort zone, but I really enjoyed making my weekly spreads, although I did end up skipping a week, so I decided to just leave it out. And so I only have one more weekly spread to make after this one, and then I'm starting my April setup on the next 2 pages. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you may know that I already made 2 April setups with a cherry blossom theme, the only exception being last year, and so for this one I wanted to bring it back, especially because I always think of cherry blossom trees when I think of April, and so for the colors I chose some light pinks, a bluish green, and 2 red tones, and then I also used my favorite black gel pen from Muji. So starting off, I made a little calendar on the first page for tracking and planning my work stuff, and I used the green acrylograph to write the weekdays on the top, which, by the way, the acrylographs I used are all from the Warm Fall collection, in case you're wondering. And for the font, I went for this more like clean looking lettering, where I made the downstrokes a bit thicker, but I didn't fill them in, and I just think it works really well for this theme because I wanted something a bit more bold that still looks a bit dainty, if that makes sense. I made the F for Friday a bit off-centered, so I corrected it with a white acrylograph, which worked super well because they're really opaque. And then for the dates, I colored in the first row of each week, alternating between the very light pink and the darker one. As for the size of the calendar, the days are 2 by 3 grid spaces, and I did accidentally include one more week at the bottom because for some reason I thought April ended on a Monday, but I ended up just including the first week of May in the calendar because it's pretty difficult to cover up a larger area like this. Then I used a ruler and a black gel pen to make all the borders and also to write down the dates, and I like to include the last few days of the month before, so in this case March, just so that the days aren't completely empty. And I didn't actually cross them out this time because again I had that whole extra week on the bottom and I thought it would look a bit weird. Now, usually I like to make my color code for filling out the calendar on the bottom, but this time I decided to add it to the side because the calendar was super tall. And then how this calendar works is you draw a circle in the colors you chose for whatever you need to do each day. So for example, if I work on YouTube and Instagram, I will draw a pink and a green circle in 2 of the 4 grid spaces of each day. You can see what it looks like filled in the flip through at the beginning, and the reason I like this method is just because I can visualize how often I work on something and just how busy I am in general if I want to plan ahead. But you could also use it for something like tracking your habits or different types of workouts and so on. In general, I think using a color code just saves a lot of space, so definitely let me know if you use a color code in your bullet journal as well. Anyway, I wanted to decorate the space underneath the calendar with some cherry blossoms, and I was inspired by the Japanese sakura, where the blossoms usually have 5 petals, and they have these red pollen stems in the middle, and I just think they're super pretty. For my past 2 cherry blossom themes, I went for a very painterly and like realistic style, so this time I wanted to keep them super simple and a lot more stylized. I will explain my process a bit more on the cover page, and there will be quite a lot of drawing in this video, so you can definitely see how I make them a bit better. All the way on the bottom, I also wanted to add my YouTube and Instagram growth trackers, and I kept them super small, so I just wrote the titles in black on the sides vertically, and then I made 2 simple sections where I can write down my subscriber and follower count on the first and the last day of April. Moving on to my cover page, I usually like to make a very structured drawing with a border, but this time I wanted to try something a bit different for a change, and so I started with just writing April in black into the middle of the page, and I used that same font from before and also spaced out the letters quite a bit. I added 2 little dots on the sides in green just to fill in the space a bit more since April is such a short word, and then I started drawing a bunch of cherry blossoms above and below the title, and I wanted to have them make this sort of wave shape, which you'll see a bit better when it's done. I started out with the one closest to the title just so that there is enough space, and then I made them a bit smaller as they go further away from it, which helps to create that shape that I wanted. I just drew 3 blossoms on each side, so 3 on the top and then 3 on the bottom. For the ones on the top, I used the light pink marker first to map out the shapes of the petals, and then I went in with the pink acrylograph later, but I actually ended up doing it the other way around for the rest of the setup. You could definitely do it both ways, but in general I started with 5 lines in this kind of star shape, starting from the middle of the flower so that I can place the petals more evenly, and then the petals themselves have 2 little points on the tips, which is very characteristic for cherry blossoms. And then for the markers, I roughly colored in the petals with a super light pink first, and then added the darker pink more concentrated into the middle. This definitely doesn't have to be clean whatsoever, because when you add the other details, you don't really notice what's underneath as much. I tried to kind of feather out the strokes towards the outside of the petals, and then I used the fine liner tip of that very bright red to draw the pollen stems, and I made some of them longer and some of them shorter just for a bit of variation. And then lastly, I also added a dot on each of the stems with the dark red acrylograph. Because of all those different layers, the blossoms look a lot more detailed but also stylized, which was exactly what I was going for, and they're also pretty easy to draw and don't take that much time. I did also experiment a lot with different colors and markers before making this setup, because I wanted to see which colors work best together. So if you want to recreate this theme, you don't need the exact same colors, just try out a few different variations with the pens you have and see what you like best. Next, I went in with the green acrylograph to add a bunch of little leaves and to fill in the empty spots, and I colored them in almost completely except for a little white stripe down the middle, and I tried it out with just outlines or completely colored in, but I ended up liking this version best. I actually really enjoyed trying out different things beforehand. It's a very creative process, and in the end, this might actually be one of my favorite cover pages I've ever done, so I hope you like it as well. I did also fill in any other empty spots with some dots in the same green shade, and I made some of them bigger and some of them smaller, just so that there's a bit more variation again. So yeah, here you can see that shape I was talking about, and let's move on to the next page, which will be for my habit trackers. I've been doing the same layout for super long for my habits, so I thought it was about time that I try out something a bit new. So instead of placing the title on the top like I usually do, I wanted them to be on the sides. So for my habits, I first made a vertical line in that dark red, just to have some separation from the trackers, which also helps to structure the spread a bit. And then I wrote habits in black vertically on that left section. Then I filled the entire section with cherry blossoms and leaves just like before, and I drew some of them around the title, and I just left a bit of a border so that they don't overlap. You could also tape off the title with something like washi tape if you want it to be super clean, but I just kind of eyeballed it here. I tried to also vary the sizes of the blossoms a bit, and just to fill out the space as evenly as possible. This theme is definitely similar to some others I've done before, like my oranges or lemon theme, where the doodles function more like a pattern, and I'm definitely a big fan of those sort of themes, so I think I'll try to make more like them. Since the acrylographs don't dry immediately, I first did the outlines of the blossoms and then switched to drawing the leaves so that when I color in the petals, the ink from the acrylographs doesn't mix with the markers. I also filled in the rest of the space with the small dots since I was already using the green, and then I switched to my markers to go through the same process of coloring the petals like before. Now, whenever there's more drawing involved, I don't really have much to talk about, so I hope you'll just enjoy watching this time lapse for now. Since I placed the title and all of those doodles on the left side, I wanted to keep the trackers themselves pretty simple, so I started by coloring in a line for the title, again alternating between the 2 light pink shades, and I did 3 rows of 2 trackers, so 6 habit trackers in total, and then I had some more space on the bottom for some weekly habits. I made 6 simple boxes underneath for each tracker, and they're 7 spaces wide for the weekdays and then 6 spaces tall so that there's enough space to write down the weekdays in the first row, and then also for the 5 weeks of April below. Originally, when I had planned this spread, I still had it in my mind that April has 6 weeks, but I just left some more space between the trackers, which worked out perfectly fine. I think if I don't mention these things, nobody would actually question it, but I just kind of like to walk you through my process and the sort of like mistakes I make when making my spreads, because at the end of the day, no journal is perfect and there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, I wrote down my habits in black and also the weekdays into that first row of the sections, and then I also made a line underneath them in green just to include a bit more color in the trackers. I also crossed out the days from March with the pink acrylograph, and actually something else I wanted to talk about is when I plan out which colors I will use, for example for like backgrounds or titles, I try to keep in mind which colors are most used in the doodles as well. This time, for example, the dark red and the very bright red is only used for very small details, whereas the green and especially the pinks are what stand out most in the doodles, so I use those colors mostly for the sections and titles as well. Underneath my daily habits, I also included 4 habits I want to do on a weekly basis, so I made a horizontal line just to separate them a bit, and then I used the lightest pink as a background for the habits. This month I wanted to track making my weekly spreads in my bullet journal, doing a little cleanup session, posting on Instagram, and lastly doing a little weekly reset to get ready for the next week. And to track them, I drew 4 small circles underneath each habit that I can color in once I complete them. For the other page, I wanted to make the title in the same style, but this time on the right side, so that there is this kind of nice border on the outside of the whole spread, which I think ended up looking super pretty. First, I wrote IG for my Instagram content planner, and then I of course decorated around the title with more cherry blossoms. Now next up for my Instagram planner, I kept it the same as always, and sorry about the blurry footage here. I accidentally set my camera to autofocus and it doesn't work very well, but it gets better in a bit. So I just made a section that I divide into 3 columns, and then I write down what the post will be into the first column, when I want to post it in the second one, and then I also use a color code to track my progress in the last column, which is what I'm writing down underneath here. I choose 4 of the colors and I assign them to each step I need to complete before posting. So making the spread, taking pictures, editing them, and then actually posting on Instagram. I filled in the empty space with another cherry blossom, and I also added another border with the dark red underneath it because I wanted to include some other sections on the bottom half. Then I used those same colors to draw 4 circles in the last column, and then to fill it in I can just color in the circle when I complete each one of those steps. For the other title underneath, I wrote April because I wanted to have some general planning sections for the whole month. And again, I don't really have anything to talk about here when I'm just drawing, but I'm also curious if you enjoy just watching the time lapse or if you would prefer me to make them faster or just talk some more, so let me know in the comments down below. The first section I wanted to include is for my art practice because I'm trying to learn a 3D software at the moment for university, and so I wanted to practice some more and just follow some fun tutorials, and so I thought I could keep track of them here. I made another simple section with the lightest pink as a background for the title on the top, and then the border in black. I also drew a small circle on the left in each row that I can color in when I complete a tutorial or a project, and then I also used the darker pink to trace the lines because I wanted to give the section a bit more color. Then I also made 2 more small sections on the very bottom of the page, and this time I used the darker pink as a background for the title for some more variation, and then these 2 are for my monthly goals and for YouTube, so I can write down, for example, any theme ideas and just random notes that come to mind. Also, if you do have any ideas for themes you would like to see me make, definitely leave them down below. I always love reading your comments. And that's it for these 2 pages. I really love how they turned out, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of the month. First, I made a mini calendar on the top left, and for this layout, I divided the page into 8 equal sections that are 11 spaces wide and 15 spaces tall, and then I left a bit of space in between them horizontally so that I can fill it with more cherry blossoms. Speaking of, I also surrounded the mini calendar with a bunch of cherry blossoms and leaves, and I made sure to keep them somewhat within that section because I also wanted to add a border, which you'll see in a bit. I used the black gel pen and a ruler to make the border, and I just left out any spaces where the doodles go outside of the section, if that makes sense. I actually really like this look because it breaks up all those straight lines a bit. Then for my daily sections, I started by writing the weekdays on the top in the middle of each section. Since my sections are 11 spaces wide, I used the 3 middle grid spaces as a guide to make sure they're all even. I used the green shade this time, and I only wrote the first 2 letters of each weekday so that they all have the same length. And for Saturday and Sunday, since I don't usually need as much space on the weekend, I split the last section in half horizontally. Next, I used the lightest pink to color in the sides next to the weekdays, and then I made the borders in black underneath, leaving a space in between the section and the title. I do tend to make my pages pretty full sometimes, so I tried to space out the different elements a bit more this time. For the dates, I first colored in 3 grid spaces with the darker pink on the bottom of the sections as the background, then wrote the date in black, and then also made 2 lines next to the dates in green, again trying to incorporate all of those main colors. Then for that last section, I wanted to balance out the first section with something similar on the bottom so that there is this kind of nice diagonal axis. And so I just wrote April and then filled in the section with more cherry blossoms and leaves, and then also added a black border just like I did for the first one. If you want to recreate this theme, but you feel like you need more space for Saturday and Sunday, you could also replace this section with the one for Sunday so that all of your weekdays have the same amount of planning space. Lastly, to finish the spread, I filled the empty space in the middle with more cherry blossoms, which ties everything together, and I think it ended up looking super cute. So I really hope you guys like it as well. If you do end up recreating this theme or any of my past ones, make sure to tag me on Instagram so that I can interact with your posts and also feature them in a future video. I didn't include any this time again because there were only a few, so I thought I would collect some more until the next month. And that brings us to the end of this video, so let's go ahead and do a little flip through. Like I said in the beginning, I think this theme is definitely one of my all-time favorites, and it's also my favorite one of the cherry blossom themes I've done so far. I think the colors are just perfect for spring, and I also really like how the doodles came out, so definitely let me know how you like it in the comments, and also which page was your favorite this time. Also, if you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on my future videos. And again, leave any questions or ideas in the comments. I always try to reply to all of them, but I'm sorry if I miss some of them every now and then. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!